Hi, this is Christopher Smith. I'm the publisher of the American Cannabis Report on PCM-TV, and I am super excited to bring you today Shaun Salvaje, who is from Highly Informed. Shaun, how you doing? Great to see you.
Hi, Chris. It's good to be here.
Where am I reaching you?
I'm in Austin, Texas right now. We're getting ready for South by Southwest.
Fantastic. There were a couple things that we wanted to talk to you about. It's hard to choose what to talk to you about because you are one of those people. I've decided that there's I think American society bingo is my game. And you, I think, have a little marker on almost every single box. So just quick, I mean, we've talked about this before. You are a Latina, female, veteran, military veteran, cannabis patient, single mother, entrepreneur. Bingo. I think you win. I think the game's over.
Oh, there's so many more boxes too.
I think there are. I think there are. That's just that's all. I only got one hand. That's all I have. So
I think that's what's so interesting about getting to know people is you kind of start to find that everybody has a really unique story and everyone has this interesting formula that they bring to the table. And the more you show up and listen, the more is revealed. So we'll
absolutely.
See. But thank you. Yes, lots of boxes, lots of opportunity to do some good.
No doubt. I wanted to talk a little bit about today. We started talking about your military background. So I think it would be helpful for people to understand just what that has meant to you, what the process was. You were in the Air Force, I believe, right?
Yes, I did 12 years. I served in the Air Force. I retired out in 2018 temporarily, and then in 2020, January 2020, I was permanently retired out.
Okay. Well, I myself didn't have the privilege of serving, so I just want to say that how much I appreciate you doing what you did, gave 12 years of your life to protect mine. So I want to say sincerely that I appreciate you for that.
I think it's like a calling. You know, for people who, for some people, I feel it's a calling. Like public service is just a way of being, and so it's no thing. I think a lot of service members are like, thank you, but it's also our duty and what people signed up for.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful. And your specialty, however, so you were not a pilot or something like that. Maybe you can tell me a little bit more about what you did there and your special work there.
No, the Air Force saw how fun I like to drive or how fast I like to drive. Maybe they were like, not pilots for her. But I was a combat photographer. So I was a military photojournalist. And what that means is I would attach to different units and cover their stories, begin to understand the different ways that they were contributing to the mission and how each piece led to a greater puzzle, like a greater picture, and what that total picture was evolving towards. So that was a really interesting way to spend my 20s, kind of evaluating all the different ways that our military operations were influencing, you know, what would become a globalized society. So that's where it kind of started.
That is an incredibly stressful environment, whether you're on the front line, you know, shooting and taking fire, or whether you're involved in just the responsibilities that you had there. And I understand that led to some other things for you as well afterwards.
Yes. So when I retired out, I was in New York City. When I ended my career, I was in New York working for the Pentagon as a media broker, and I was in communication strategy. And what that evolved into was me eventually opening my own consultancy where I was helping startup entrepreneurs in tech and emerging markets with their business strategy, their communication and marketing. And what I ended up finding is that most communication and marketing issues are actually fundamentally a relationship and connection issue that business owners are having. where they're not maybe developing out the foundation of their operations. And so as they begin to scale, they start to see problems really magnified in a way that they couldn't have predicted. Like if you have a small crack in your foundation at the beginning, what it ends up becoming later is it's not like doubled, it's like exponentially detrimental to the growth of a business. So I started studying, how people work together, how teams got things done. That was something that was always a part of my military experience.
Right.
And it was something that I found like really fascinating and amazing about military service, was that you could you could bring together a group of completely different people and learn how to work together towards one directive for a higher calling or a greater mission. And I find this kind of thing, purpose-driven work, is something people are really craving right now, but they're not quite sure how to get to it. That was something that kind of drove my work into the cannabis industry in the field of psychedelics.
Now,
And
do you
I'm so
think that
sorry if I have background noise. I have a giant dog, and of course now she's decided to get really active.
now she's got something to say, right? Yeah. Isn't that always the way? Like Rico with his baby girl, she decides that she's going to talk when he's talking, kind of thing, on State of Cannabis. Same thing. So now, do you find, Shaun, that I think what you're saying is that people in the military are trained to work together. The system is designed to get those different kinds of people to work together. But in civilian life, it's people come at it from all different experiences, but they don't get pressed in together and learn to process and learn methodologies as well. Or is that what you're finding out there in the real world?
Well, so I'm not a clinical psychologist, but I do love to explore like this space. And I am hoping there are a couple partnerships that are in development to further explore what this means in the business world and bring plant medicine, psychology, and business ethics together to explore what we can do for the future. But yes, I am finding that what we have is, at least from my experience, we have this prioritization of the individual experience, which is really important. It is important, but not at the detriment of the collective. And one of the problems that usually I find surfacing is that there is a misunderstanding. We're misunderstanding what our individual experiences are because we're attaching these meanings and messages based on all of these years of societal programming it's creating this like pandemic of sorts of mental health issues, of anxieties, of foundational insecurities that we have as a people, that is leading to this destructive little cycle in our personal lives, but also on a much larger scale, when we're looking at the global crisis, when we're looking at wars, Russia behaving the way that it is, the situation in the Ukraine unfolding the way that it is. Really, it is all pretty indicative of a foundation of basic human behavior. So what I've transitioned into, and I don't know how we got all the way over here, but
You're bringing it back now, I can tell.
well, we've got to figure out how cannabis and psychedelics can play a role in this, because there is a way that both provide a sort of foundational reset, an opportunity to push pause on the messages and the conditioning that we've received thus far, and actually accurately self-evaluate without fear. I think it comes down to this ability to be self-aware enough to want to fix what isn't working for you. But first you have to know what's not working for you. And that's really difficult for a lot of people to do, because it requires a little bit of some acknowledgement of how you're probably sabotaging yourself. But I'm really excited about, the potential that entheogenic medicine, and I include cannabis in entheogens because I think it's underrated as an entheogenic or psychedelic medicine. But I'm excited to see how these plants and medicines kind of give more power to the people to start to ask these questions and have these conversations with themselves. So that way we can get to a real understanding of what we can achieve individually and collectively, because we have a lot that we need to fix, within society structures and the way that we're seeing things play out.
I think
That's
also maybe,
the big vision.
wow, that's immense, actually. That's enough. I think that's enough for anyone to try to get their head around. That's amazing. I think maybe cannabis also, one of the things that it provides too is a buffer of safety, so that people can express these things in an environment that feels safe, right? That's less judgmental, right? So the gloves that, you know, come off and we're ready to fight because we're from a different part of the country or a different ethnicity or a different political party, like all that stuff settles down. Cannabis bridges all those things and then allows human beings to communicate as human beings, right? And share that experience, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It allows us to put down our own defenses long enough to actually tap into presence and just be in the moment and
Right.
connect with that frequency at that very time and place, and without the noise of the future or the past. I think this is one of the most magnificent properties of entheogenic medicine, is it enables a type of presence that usually we only associate with high levels of meditation. But these things can be achieved with these kinds of medicines, and they can be achieved through functional fitness and all kinds of other alternative therapies that could be the beginning of a new way to look at preventative healthcare.
It's so interesting. It's so interesting. The kinds of things you're talking about are, you would hear these kinds of things in team building, you know, yay team, we got to work together. There's, you know, any kind of team that does anything needs to embody all of the things that you're talking about, right? We can't fight against each other. We have to work together in that, right? We have to fight the other out there, right? We have to solve problems, not fight each other. And what you're talking about is really such a huge, but again, fundamental, foundational, that's a perfect word for it, I think, like you said.
It's even like a matter of reframing things, like instead of solving problems, more like finding solutions, because then you change your energetic approach to what you're doing.
Right.
Like I, for the longest time, was, you know, part of why I returned. So I came from a legacy background, in the fact that I grew up in the projects as a kid. Weed was everywhere. The opportunity to come up in the culture at the time was to join the military, be a football player, or sell
or be a
weed.
drug dealer.
Yeah,
or be a drug
exactly.
dealer, right?
Or be a drug dealer. And if you wanted to play in that space, then you needed to probably be affiliated with someone for a level of protection. And those weren't really options for me as an oldest daughter, as the granddaughter of a really hardworking immigrant. It wasn't going to be the path that I chose, because I felt a need to really do everything right, perfectly, follow the system. But then I also kind of learned that the system is really inherently designed against a lot of us. And it's not a matter, race is definitely an issue, but it's also a much bigger issue about economic equality and freedom and access and opportunity to this, like these basic fundamental principles that we all say are very American. And this is why I don't apologize for my service, even when our nation is kind of facing this opportunity to self-reflect and grow. Because we're in this space where we can kind of look at what we're doing and do better, and maybe fix some of these systems, like old Jim Crow influences on prison reform. This has led to a new Jim Crow opportunity. So we're not actually shifting conversations and narratives in the directions that we want to. We're more placating our own fears and guilt. And that is kind of an issue that I would like to see us address. And I think this kind of comes from the military service, because when you go overseas and you deploy, you put a lot on the line to do that. And so you want to ask yourself, what's the return on the investment with my country? Like, what is our social contract here? Especially as a minority woman, you kind of have to really ask what the contract is, because, you know, we all know women are paid less than men, women paid even less. And we're in Women's History Month right now. We would be remiss to not look at this as an opportunity to find solutions, instead of just addressing problems, which I know I just listed a bunch of them, but I'm really excited about what cannabis and entheogenic medicine can do to help people be a little more innovative, to help people be a little more transparent, maybe even hopefully some of our government leaders can take a dose and come to some awakenings. That would be really nice. But I digress.
I can picture a few of our senators sitting around passing a joint. That anyway, that's gonna give me a good reason to smile for the rest of the afternoon. I've noticed that, I've noticed a lot recently when people talk about the United States, talk about America, that America is a story, and America is not sort of an old kingdom or something like this. It's a story. It's a set of beliefs that we all adhere to, right? The life, liberty, pursuit of happiness group, I'm going to say all people are created equal. All of these things are values that we can share, right? These are stories. And the anti-cannabis story, right? The whole reefer madness story is a story. It's a legend. It's a story. It's a mythology, right? And I think your and my job as storytellers is to tell a better story. And I think that's what you're saying about it. We need to be solutions providers, not problem solvers really, but we need to provide solutions, right? We need to provide a better story.
You know what I like about that perspective, Chris, is when you think about it, like, okay, if we need to provide a better story, then we need to focus on what we're paying attention to. And it brings me back to the cycle of the individual and the collective, because the collective is really a reflection of an amalgamation of individuals, right? So
yes,
you
sir.
Can't avoid the collective. You can't escape it. It exists because we exist as a species.
Right.
So we have to understand what that is as its own ecosystem and organism. And when we look at telling better stories, then we have to ask ourselves, well, what are the stories we're telling ourselves right now that are kind of holding us back? Or what are the stories that we're telling ourselves that are preventing us from acknowledging where we need to make real progress? Like when it comes to prison reform, or when it comes to who we're supporting with our vote, and whether they're actually getting any effective change done. Often, especially being a veteran, you're not allowed when you're in service to have any kind of comment on left or right. You're supposed to remain unbiased because that's what we do in the Department of Defense. You're to remain unbiased to prevent any kind of abuse of military power. And so, especially having worked, I worked for 3 different administrations. I worked for the Bush administration, I worked for the Obama administration, and I also finished my tour with the Trump administration, which was a real wild ride because we would get PR releases through Twitter, just like the rest of you. So it was interesting to say the least. But the reality is, so much of this is about the story that we're telling ourselves about each other and ourselves. And
absolutely.
I really think we could start to come to some truth or some form of acceptance and an ability. I don't know if Cannabis Doing Good, if you've heard of Kelly Perez from Cannabis Doing Good, but she has, I listened to her recently at a marketing thing, and actually she's going to be speaking at South by Southwest. I'm really excited because we're going to be shooting an interview with her for Highly Informed. And we'll talk about
we're going to get to that in a minute.
Yes. But Kelly Perez, she says it's really about becoming shame resilient. Being able to understand and accept where you are as the result or a function of all the formulas and inputs that we have digested and consumed as a society to this point, and recognizing, just like with your own personal health and well-being, recognizing how we've contributed to issues and where maybe we could look at some things and change the way we're doing them. And I think we're at this very unique point after the pandemic, and given what's happening in the Ukraine, where we can really self-reflect on who we want to be moving forward. Or we can self-reflect on if it's not who we want to be because we don't have any choice, which we're going to watch and see if the American government is also reflective of the voice of the American people. And to this point, when it comes to minority people, it has not been. So we are also being judged for what we do. But I'm excited to see, where we drive this conversation. I think we're at a place where we might actually be at a fork where we can make a lot of positive change. But it requires a lot of self-discipline, and it requires a lot of work, and it requires an understanding that at the end of the day, we're ancestors too. we're going to have people who follow us, and it's on us to be good ancestors, not just descendants with our own legacies.
It really does feel like we're at an inflection point right now. It feels like we've just come through the incredibly disruptive period of Trump being president. I just read a thing today which said one of his national security advisor, John Bolton, I forget his role title specifically, but Bolton said that what planned to do in his second term was leave NATO, was pull America out of NATO. And if he had been able to do that, then this whole Ukrainian thing would have been solved in about 4 seconds, right? So anyway, it was so disruptive in so many ways. There's that. And then there's, of course, COVID, which was so utterly disruptive and deadly, by the way. But now it seems like we're eking our way out of that. And it seems like such an opportunity for us right now to do better.
I think people are craving something better. They want change.
That's right.
I think the voters have definitely gotten to a point of frustration that is no longer acceptable. And you'll see, like, even when we're looking at the cannabis industry, you see consumers' opinions and the way that they use cannabis is also changing. It's more informed and educated, because we're looking at an audience of, millennials and Gen Z that they want answers. They're demanding more accountability. Right. And we're going to have to, that was something when I worked for the Pentagon, I'm really glad to say I was always able to maintain my integrity, which is a really difficult thing to do. We saw what happened recently with, they had him on the state of cannabis this morning. His name escapes me, but
Jamarcus.
Yes, Jamarcus. The aide for Feinstein and
Jamarcus Purley.
Yes.
Jamarcus Purley.
So some of the comments that he has about the organizational behavior of government on that level are absolutely valid. It is exactly what you imagine it is, because it is exactly what you're probably experiencing in corporate America too. These are just patterns and cycles, and also in personal relationships. Like, these are cycles and patterns that perpetuate themselves on larger scales. And then we also have to be mindful always, I'm not going to comment on any administration, because to me, all I saw was a pattern of corruption that was, neither one was innocent. Everybody had blood on their hands, and it was always about the money. So we should all consider all of the information that we've received over the last couple of years and look at where all of this money is going. Because it seems to be, I can't help but feel that the economy the way that we seem to stimulate the economy on a global scale is through the war machine. And that is concerning, because that is not sustainable. And it's not the only way to do this. Mind you, the Russian aggression is absolutely abhorrent, uncalled for. And, let's go Ukrainians. I'm excited to see them fight and show us all a little bit more about what we're actually all made of. Because I think what the world can take stock of is a question of, what are you made of? Like, who are you going to be? How are you going to show up? And if the call comes, are you going to be someone who stands up, or are you going to be someone who adheres to the status quo and accepts that, for what they want for their future? I think right now is a time where we're going to have to make some real decisions if we're going to make some change. We can no longer placate the status quo or the organizational way of being on a global scale.
Well, just speaking politically just for a moment, and I want to get back to the opportunities that you have coming up, because I know you've got some huge chances just for yourself. But since we're on the subject of politics, I do think also the Ukrainians have the opportunity, speaking of storytelling, the Ukrainians have the opportunity that the Americans had in 1775, in 1776. They have the same opportunity. They are being invaded by a foreign force. They're standing up for their own country and their own patriotism. They're standing up behind the heroes who literally stand on the barricades and fight, hand in hand like they are. Their president, Zelensky, is doing amazing. But the mythology that they can build now can carry their country for the next 100 years, right? The mythology of what they're doing, and the courage and the bravery and the integrity and the patriotism is the kind of thing. It's the storytelling is so powerful. We're still telling the same stories.
that's a really astute observation, because when you look at humanity over time, like we still, Viking stories or these war stories of these
Right.
heroes, that seems to me to be indicative of the fact that we are all looking for a glimmer of hope, something to believe in, some cause
Absolutely.
much bigger than what we have gotten with capitalism and consumerism. Not that capitalism and consumerism are the root of all evil. I don't believe that either. I think it's an energy exchange. We just need to shift the way that we're looking at it and turn it into a system that is creating rather than taking. There's no limitation to the pie. Like, there's no limitation to what we can create if we're connecting with potential in this way. The only limitation is we're so afraid as different economic classes that the betterment of one class is going to lead to the detriment of another. That's not just when it comes to economic class. That's also when it comes to race and sex. Like, this shouldn't be an issue. It's not an issue, but somehow we've made up the story in our mind that it is. But with like the Ukraine, back to the original point, with these stories of hope and opportunity, chance for us to reflect on our own stories and what we bring to the table, and to maybe even acknowledge the value that maybe we haven't been able to see before. I think people need to tap into that a little bit more and see where they might have more resilience than what they previously expected. Everybody's been through a test over the last 2 years. So how did you come out?
I think that is in a way, see if I figure this out. It's a very perfect segue, I think, really. The story, the mythology, the legend, right, of what's happening now in our politics that we see now on the screen all day long about Ukraine. The same opportunity, I think, is before us, you and me, before us storytellers in the cannabis business, right? Because there are legends of our industry, there are individual legends in our industry, but also the motivations of our industry are so different, I think, than virtually anything we've ever seen before. And like we talked about, it bridges ethnicity, geography, politics, race, all of it. It goes, but it doesn't pay attention to any of those old divisions. It offers a bridge, right? And just cannabis as a plant, as a product, it does. But in the way that we do business, in the way that we interact, in the way that in cannabis, diversity is the strength. I've said this a bunch of different times, but I think the diversity of the industry is the strength of the industry. It is our power.
I think in cannabis, it's more pronounced. So the reality is, this is true in every industry. A diversity of thought is always good for an organization because you can avoid groupthink. You can get more feedback. You have more data points to actually make good decisions. When we subjugate opinions based on, these nonsensical illusions of separation, we create a lot of problems. So when it comes to diversity in cannabis, diversity in any industry is good, beneficial for the bottom line. Companies are starting to recognize this. When I was a consultant back in the day, this was a conversation a lot of DEI people were having, but they were having to have it in hushed rooms because, people didn't want to hear it. Just a couple of years ago, it was really about the bottom line. It was really about the money, and it was about how fast you could move. 2018, we were assholes. I mean, I'm pretty sure I was in New York, and I think most of us were operating in a level that was a little too fast. And we should have learned maybe something from 2008, but we didn't. And we find ourselves at these interesting interjections where we can learn lessons again, and we can choose a different path, or we can do the same thing. We're yet to see what will happen in the case of California, because I feel like California is constantly going through these cycles, especially with the level of regulation that you have. But when it comes to where were we?
Well, I'll tell you what, though. No, speaking of California, let's tip you right into the opportunities that you mentioned to me earlier.
Well, let's say, before that, because we got to address this diversity in cannabis.
Okay.
Cannabis does have a unique opportunity to lead the way. So diversity in every industry is profitable bottom line. We know this for a fact.
Right.
And we're just now starting to look at the data to support these cases. It's not that this wasn't the case ever before. It's just that now we're actually looking at the data instead of supporting the stories that we've been wanting to tell ourselves about certain things. Cannabis does, you're right, Chris, it does have a unique opportunity to be an example. It can be a catalyst. It can be a way that we innovate how we do business. And to do that, we're going to have to really look. I think cannabis highlights it, especially because cannabis consumption and product sales, what the consumer wants, is so reflective of cannabis culture right now. We also have to consider how that's going to continue to evolve as the industry normalizes and becomes industrialized. And that's worth developing systems and structures at the beginning that protect the voice of the people and the plant in equal access. When we do that after the fact, we tend to make a lot of mistakes.
Absolutely. We cannot be an industry of Budweiser or Miller Lite. We cannot. We cannot. But let's talk. So there are actually three really exciting pieces of news that I know you want to break about Shaun Salvaje, that have literally just happening this week, I think. All three of them, I think, right? I mean, you're popping right now.
Yeah, I've been hard at work for some time, and I think that's kind of how it goes for cannabis, is you put your head down, you keep your nose to the stone, you learn your lessons, you embrace that you're going to learn your lessons. I had an experiment with cultivation last year where I learned a couple things the hard way, and I'm grateful for it, which is really hard to say because when you're in the middle of it, especially when you're in cannabis, you really feel it, especially on the cultivation side. Yeah. So you get your reps in and you learn your lessons and you keep developing and things grow. So I'm really excited to share. And it's so hard. It's so interesting. Like, I really love telling other people's stories, and I always have I'm pretty good at dodging my own. And so I need to work on this. I'm really great at communicating for everybody else, and I'm really terrible at it for myself. But I'm really excited to share 2 partnerships. One with an edible brand that's launching in California, K&D Infusions. I'm really excited. They've got something that's really exciting. Wesley is an incredible man. He is representing Black men in cannabis, which I am very excited and happy to support. He has a product that is really considering, putting wellness at the center of the conversation. And I think that is something that is long overdue within the industry. Culture will get you far. Clout will get you way less further. Clout will only get you so far. Culture will get you a lot further, but really understanding and connecting, that's the thing. Beyond culture, beyond clout, we're talking about connection. That's going to get you to the finish line when it comes to consumer goods, when it comes to normalizing the plant, when it comes to education and access, and when it comes to creating an industry that the other players take seriously. The other industrial organizations like tobacco and alcohol, they're not going to take us seriously until we start taking ourselves a little more seriously. And that requires us to level up. But it requires us to level up in a way that really considers not just our bottom line, but the well-being of the consumer, and then also the well-being of the industry at large, and the opportunity we have to create economic equality for everyone after all these years of redlining and disenfranchisement through the war on drugs, which is really, the new Jim Crow being reinforced through the prison system. So these are bigger, deeper conversations we need to have. Cannabis is at the tip of the spear, and we need to take that very seriously. That's a duty and a responsibility we have to the medicine to protect it. Like, I take that as seriously as I took the oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. I take this commitment to cannabis and psychedelic medicine just as seriously. So I'm really happy to be partnering with them.
So say the name. So they're
K&D Infusions.
K&D Infusions. Okay.
Yes. So that is very exciting. We'll be launching retail hopefully later this year. And then,
where are they located in California? They have one headquarters, or they have several? Or
LA. It's in LA. Like, hey, California, I'm coming out to play. This old Texas girl's coming your way.
Come on out.
You thought you could keep me bottled up in the Lone Star State, but I've just too much for Texas. But
Come on back. We've been missing you.
I'm excited. I'm excited. We're gonna do more, definitely more travel out to Cali. You know, as much as I give the West Coast hell, you know, probably because I love New York and then I'm from Texas. It's like a thing between Texas and California. I remember when I was in 4th grade, Texas and California were still upset with each other over something. It's just what we do. It must be a family.
We always will be. It's because Texas.
But,
It's because Texas is jealous. We understand. It's okay.
well, we think y'all are jealous. I mean, y'all got some crazy regulations. A whole lot of you are migrating this way. So I don't know if we'll see what happens. But I'm excited to come out. I'm excited about launching the brand. I'm excited to bring wellness and a new perspective to cannabis from the Lone Star State. And you know, Wes is from he's from Philly. So he's out east. So we're connecting all the dots and bringing that diversity that we were talking about, Chris. We're bringing that to the cannabis stage.
Absolutely.
With consumer at the heart of the conversation. And then on top of that, I do have something cooking in the Lone Star State too. I'm really excited to announce a partnership with Tejas Hemp, with Aaron Owens of Tejas Hemp. Aaron has this remarkable THCV formula that I have been in love with for the last 2 years. And so this feels like a partnership that's really a manifestation of, you know, a bigger dream. You know, it goes to show that when you really admire something, a product, or you see something really innovative and you're in the space, just reach out, connect, start having conversations. Because if you would have told me 2 years ago, I would be having, I'd be announcing a partnership with Tejas Hemp and helping them to educate the masses on the benefits of THCV and how good it can be for your body and total wellness. We are gonna have academic studies. We have all sorts of things that are in the works on both sides for K&D and for Tejas. So we're actually gonna be bringing some real cannabis wellness products to the people so we can elevate the conversation around your wellness. I'm really
fantastic.
Excited.
Now, I told you that with Jimmy Young, who's the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, the platform we're on right now, with Jimmy last week, we interviewed Aaron, right?
Yeah, that's funny. I was like, oh, that's such perfect timing.
Well, it was just such a funny conversation because he comes on and he's got the cowboy hat and the whole thing, and he's good old boy from the beginning, right? And then you start to ask him more direct questions about the chemistry and about the breakdown and about the molecular level of things and about the growing and the uptake. And the man sounds like Albert Einstein all of a sudden. Like the hat comes off and the lab coat. Like,
well, you know, Texas.
It's amazing the depth of someone.
I mean, you know, Texans are smarter than most people think. We're simple folk, but we're, you know, simple in the way that it's actually kind of sophisticated. So he really knows what he's talking about when it comes to THCV. He has an incredible process where he's getting it naturally, which is not something that everybody has. So we're not talking about the kind of extraction that we see when we're, you know, making Delta 8 or we're making even Delta 10 or all these other things in the lab. This THCV actually comes from the plant. Which is really remarkable. And I have to say, like for me, training as an athlete, I do a lot of jujitsu, you know, I'm a big fan of high rollers. I'm a big fan of movement as meditation, using cannabis as a part of a total wellness routine. And I have to say, with the Focus product, I was blown away. Anecdotally, I felt like it helped me. And this is what we're going to try to look into, is what it can help with when it comes to the potential. We call it Focus because there are applications when it comes to ADHD, but also when it comes to inflammation in the body. We all know that cannabis, even just the whole plant, not smoked, has vitamin K in it. It's like a superfood. It's got a lot of antioxidants. Yeah. And so that's worth considering, all of the different applications and ways that we can create accessible products for consumers to take their health and wellness into their own hands safely, and with companies that they can trust, with companies that represent the people, with companies that are concerned about diversity, with companies that are concerned about doing good and want to make sure that we're being good stewards of the plant and the industry moving forward. Because at the end of the day, industrialization is happening. We need to make sure that we are being good leaders as this conversation continues to evolve, so that way we can continue to advocate for ourselves, because the worst thing we can do is alienate ourselves and walk away from a table with no voice in the conversation. That's not going to be a smart play for us. So we need to
Sure.
take ourselves a little bit more seriously as an industry, and seeing how we can grow and contribute, because it's really going to be on us what shapes this.
I don't think, as I've been reading about the, over the last 7 or 8 years, really about cannabis, the whole species, of course, cannabis, hemp, all inclusive, right? I don't think that science has even scratched the surface of the potential of hemp. When you hear people say it's either THC or CBD, I'm like, yeah, but there's 130 something other cannabinoids, and that's only the cannabinoids. And we haven't even talked about the terpenes yet. And we haven't even talked about the interaction of all the cannabinoids with each other, and then the cannabinoids with the terpenes, and then there are flavonoids, and then there are minerals in addition. Like we haven't even touched it. We don't even, it's like we're talking about Mars right now.
Let me blow your mind then, because you're right about that. We're not talking about all the cannabinoids or all the terpenes that are found in naturally occurring plant, or the things, the profiles that we can self-create. And when I look at this, I really look at it. So during the pandemic, I went to culinary school, which some people were like, they thought that was very random. And I did it because it was random. I did it because I had kind of burned out.
No. It makes sense though now. Now it makes sense.
I'll tell you, it did make sense. It seems random, but I promise there's method to my madness. So, yeah, I had kind of burned out. I was working with a lot of tech startups during the pandemic, and I was one in particular. I had kind of just had enough with the CEO. The pandemic was really scaling up, and he really thought this was a really good time to drive profits and really work like crazy. And in the middle of everybody basically melting into crisis, and I could kind of see the team was just falling apart, he, wasn't willing to self-reflect and look at what was really going on. And I think companies got a rude awakening with the pandemic, but I digress. After that, I was like, I need a break from this. There's a pandemic going on, and my kids stopped going to school. So this was a real matter of, what am I going to do while they're home, and how is this all going to work out? So I decided to go to culinary school, because I wanted to further explore. I knew I wanted to invest in my career in cannabis, and I knew based on old stuff that you're taught as a Mexican lady in Texas, you use the lemon here, you use these kind of different terpenes and these kind of different plants like lavender and echinacea, other different herbs that can heal in different ways. And I wanted to explore how we could do that through food. So I really went to culinary school to better understand food terps and profiles. And that would help to educate my understanding of the cannabis plant. And what I'm finding is just like we respond differently to different kind of food combinations, our bodies each have like a different, unique, individual molecular structure that responds differently. So too do we respond to cannabis. So it's really interesting that you bring up all of the cannabinoids, because there's this whole frontier of exploration for right. This is why I try to we need to protect the industry and stop looking at it as a competition with one another, because the opportunity for discovery is unreal. We are just at the tip of the iceberg. But if we consider that individuals have a unique endocannabinoid system, just like they have a unique molecular system that contributes to their neurology, immunology, and digestive function, just total body function. And we know that we each have our own endocannabinoid system, that everybody responds differently. So each person probably has their own unique formulation of endocannabinoid receptors. If we know all of that, and we know that each flower and cultivar has potential for, breeding or the kind of development where we can get specific terpene profiles and structures that will match the expression that is needed in the individual people, then we can create individual solutions that are safe and accessible and put right in the hands of the people. No more going through the school of pharmacology, or not that pharmacology is an evil. Medicine is good, but it's been abused. We've used that as the solution to everything, and it's not necessarily always the first path that we can take towards wellness, and it is often the most inflammatory path. So it is something that we should use when necessary, but if there are other ways, perhaps we should explore that with cannabis, with food, with diet, with exercise, with mental wellness, with psychedelics. And that's, those are kind of some of the spaces that I'm exploring with other partnerships. There's potential for maybe some work with the psychedelic center here in Austin. So we'll see. I'm really excited about that. Regardless, we're moving that needle forward because that is something that needs to happen for us to continue to evolve this conversation beyond the politics of blue or red, capitalist economy or social issues. We shouldn't be choosing this or that when we can have both. And that's just, I really believe that. So that's what I'm going to keep advocating for. We'll see.
Well, and speaking of that, and speaking of advocating, speaking of telling the story and spreading the word, tell me a little bit about the opportunity you have coming up at one of the most important, awesome conferences that there is in the United States, South by Southwest.
I'm excited. So this is going to be the first time in 3 years that South by Southwest is going to be held in person. What we are doing for Highly Informed, for a little bit, we thought maybe we should do an event, but we decided against that because one idea that I'm really playing with this year is doing more quality than rushed quantity. And so what we're going to do is we're shooting a bunch of profile features with the women of Cannabis Doing Good, Kelly Perez. We have Courtney joining us. We have Rico Lamitte coming out from California. He's a panelist for South by Southwest, and we're going to be doing feature interviews with him. And we're going to be getting to the heart of their story. We're going to be understanding, and we've got a couple more lined up with some pitches that still need to be confirmed because this idea was a little bit of a last minute, but I'm excited to see. I mean, that's the thing about the cannabis industry is that I've seen some of the best successes are the ones where people reached out, they connected, they saw what they could do, they asked, what could you do? And they amplified the results by finding out what they could do together. And I think that's where we're going to start to see more results. So I'm really excited about it. It's actually all really coming together. It's not too intimidating considering I was a photojournalist for a while. It's really good to be back behind the lens and to be interviewing. And I'm really excited to get their stories about how they connected to cannabis, what they think about the industry, what important conversations we need to have as a community to really optimize not just, what we're doing as individual enterprises, but also what we're doing individually for ourselves and as a collective, guiding this industry forward. We need to have some real honest, raw conversations. And so that is what this is.
Sure.
A way to look at entheogenic medicine education so that we can find out how you can use it to optimize your life.
It's so funny that we're kind of at a moment. There was a story that happened that came out just today, and I can't name the company. They're two Canadian companies. One of them I know is Hexo, Hexo, and another company that is a direct competitor with Hexo, I think picked up a bunch of Hexo's debt, and so took the debt off their balance sheet and basically helped that business survive. They helped a competitor survive, and I'm remembering the moment that Apple Computer was about to die, when Steve Jobs, he had left, he'd been kicked out, and then he, did Pixar, whatever, then he came back. Apple was literally on its last legs. It was literally about to die. And the person that saved Apple Computer was Bill Gates. He invested $100 million in Apple Computer, and now Apple is one of the biggest companies in all history, right? But it was because the competitor, their blood competitor, like their enemy, Gates and, Jobs, right, were enemies at the time.
It kind of reminds me of like the age-old story, like the hero without a nemesis, like then what are you fighting? And maybe some people need that motivation, but you know what I think it's more indicative of, honestly, is that when we recognize true potential, like there has to be at some level, I can't speak for Bezos or Gates or any of those people. But here's what I can say from my own experience as an athlete and a competitor. Like I love jujitsu, fight sports, like it gets pretty gnarly. We get pretty ugly. We're beating each other up. So like you have to realize like there's a mind thing to it, right? But also when you're working together, you're a family. Like you're beating each other up, but you're a family. So you're really getting the feedback that you need. And what I think you see is that one thing when you're performing at a certain athletic level, and I'm not to say that I'm this athlete. I'm not. I wish I was. I'm no David Goggins. I try my best, but no, thank you. I'll stick with my jujitsu and my weightlifting. Not gonna do those. I don't know. Do you know who David Goggins is? He runs.
I do. He is a machine. He's a machine.
I apologize.
He's an animal.
I'm not
He's
a former
amazing.
Navy SEAL. I did what I could. I was not a SEAL, but thank God for them.
Sure, absolutely.
Anyhow, what we were going at was, it's this opportunity for us to, like, when you invest in your competitor like that, it's because you understand a rising tide raises all ships.
There you go. That's it.
Yeah, and if you can help them innovate, at some point they're going to come up with something that maybe you can build off of. Maybe you can iterate, or maybe they're going to help you see a new perspective, or maybe they're going to capture a market share. I think when we look at competition as a way to continuously evolve, innovate, and learn, it can take a lot of the pressure out of this like survivability issue that we cling to, but it ends up leading to our demise anyway. Because that kind of like anxious energy only sucks the life out of companies and their bottom line. I think there's a way to introduce healthy competition that promotes collaboration, innovation, and like a sense of camaraderie, because it's healthy competition. It's not competition at the expense of the other.
It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. That's the thing that, you know, economists or MBAs talk about all the time. It's a zero-sum game. We win, everyone else loses, and that's it. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way.
No,
it doesn't have to be total win and total loss. It doesn't have to be that way. It shouldn't be that way. It's bad. And like you said, Shaun, I think it's bad for our industry. It's bad for every single person in the industry. If a company dies, if all the people get put out on the street, if people, I mean, God, I interviewed Rico yesterday. He told me stories of things that have happened in the LA market. In fact, people who had saved money and had a big war chest saved from working in corporate America had come over to the cannabis industry, hoping to get a license in the LA business. They were wiped out, literally made homeless by the regulatory problems and the inability of Los Angeles to pull it together. That no one wins when someone who is profoundly a contributor, an important person, when that person is made homeless, none of us win. We all lose a little bit when that happens.
And I think it's indicative, you know, I keep bringing this up in conversation, but I think it's so important for people to reflect. I did not realize that this wasn't really taught in the American public schools as much. I grew up in split between, I grew up from the projects and then also in a top neighborhood in Minnesota, which is really interesting because my parents split up. So I had this really interesting dichotomy of perspective where I got one extreme and then the other. And that was kind of eye-opening. But one thing that, you know, it's indicative of is that this system is designed to do just what you described. And this is the result of a much larger issue of an American capitalist system that was built on slavery. We have to look at that, not just like, I don't want to desensitize, but I'm going to speak the language that, you know, seems to be the language that is spoken in the United States. When we look at a system that is foundationally built on an economic system that only profits off of the labor of others in a way that is inhumane, then we have to recognize as a society that that was our foundation and root. So we need to fix it because the system doesn't improve from there, no matter how many rules and regulations we throw at it. All it does is perpetuate the initial design. And the initial design was to perpetuate inequity. It was, and it really does kind of like throw me back how hard it is sometimes for Western education systems to fully conceptualize this, because it is a manifestation directly of imperialism and colonialism, which were the acts of an aristocracy in acting in its own interests, not the will of the people. The people in the meantime in Europe and other places were dealing with famines and difficulties. This is a class, this is an economic equality issue that is going to continue to perpetuate and affect more groups. And it begins when we look at the system that was built on slavery, systemic racism, and an inability to address these issues coherently. Instead, we address them by developing policies like super predator policies, which make note that are false, built on a bunch of data and information that is actually driven by government contracting and money. Like, we got to be honest with ourselves, because what we're doing when we're getting some of this data and research information that we're using to drive our decisions, we're failing to recognize that a lot of these research companies are companies that are paid to, give a very specific outlook. Like, it's part of the thing when you're consulting in this way with statistical data and analysis is, are you truly unbiased, or do we have bias built into the system? So we need to really look at this and fix it. And cannabis is absolutely going to be the tip of the spear for this, because cannabis was the thing that was used to incarcerate so many in the United States and keep the American people and the global population at large, away from a plant that helps them with their health and their economy.
However, if I may, only for the last 100 years. Here's why I mention that. Not that it's not important. It is, obviously, because it is exactly where we are. We are all caught behind that imperialist built sort of system that builds in suffering. Suffering is built into the system. The king wins, everyone else suffers. And what we've actually put our fine point on here in America, it seems, is that the king wins, everyone else suffers, and then we blame the people suffering for their own suffering. And we tell them, why don't you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps? And we shame them, and we grind them into the dirt even worse. And all of those things can change. But this business about cannabis being so negative and so and a part of that story is only in the last 100 years. Remember that cannabis and the relationship with people goes back 12,000 years, right? America, I mean, all of this, right? All of the history that we all know together, that cannabis was built into the American system. Taxes were paid in cannabis. And the great sailing ships, all the westward ho wagon train stuff, all the covered wagons were covered by hemp fabric, right? The blue jeans that were made for the gold miners were made of hemp blue jeans, right? All hemp made the sails and the riggings and the ropes for the ships that conquered the world from Europe. Hemp has been involved with American, with human civilization for thousands and thousands of years. We've got to get back to that, where it's part of what we do.
We got to get back to that. And we also have to recognize that even some of that was fundamentally, like even some of the hemp farming at the early days of the American establishment, that was also done by slaves. And it was actually very difficult work, arduous work. And this is something that we still struggle with issues in the cannabis industry of compensating workers fairly, making sure that we're taking care of migrant workers or seasonal workers, which I know, being Hispanic, I'm Mexican American, and I'm from Texas. For me, really, Mexican American is a very interesting conversation because most of my blood on that side is indigenous. So, and it's a reminder of how many flags, like we're looking at the situation in the Ukraine. We need to also look at our own situation. Like 6 flags have flown over Texas. It is a very unique place to observe how state and national policy influence populations, and especially because we have it's such an extreme in the Lone Star State. We are so adamant about protecting individual freedoms and rights, which I love and I cherish. But at the same time, we have infrastructure and systems that are fundamentally designed to rob people of those things. So we need to really evaluate that. In the reverse, though, even when we look at California trying to do things differently and creating policy the way that they've gone about it, you still have an abundance of overregulation that is still suffocating the will and the voice of the people, as well as the pocket and the purse. Like, it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. It only makes a very small group more money, but in the long term for everyone, it's like even that small group that's making more is only making a fraction of what they actually could if everything was unleashed.
Great points.
Listen,
Great points.
I never thought we would talk about regulation. I did not have that on our agenda today.
It wasn't on mine either. I'm looking at my agenda going, nah, it's not there. Okay, let's see where this goes.
I mean, it's really about understanding systems. It's about understanding human behavior and our psychology, how we lead teams, how we interact with each other, how we lead ourselves, how we like perceive the world, because we are living in a space where we're not sharing a reality. So we need to begin to communicate what the differences are and understand how we can get to the same objective as a species.
Here's why I think all of this matters so much for what you're doing, Shaun, honestly. I mean, it all is all of one giant piece. We're just sort of turning the ball over and looking at it from different aspects. But if we get back to what you are working on now, highly informed being one thing, but let's talk about like K&D and Tejas, right? Those two things you're building, because they're both new, relatively new or relatively small in a new, relatively emerging industry, cannabis, right? When we're talking about building brands, which many people think of as a very simplistic sort of, let me do a logo and some colors and then the brand is done, right? But the brand is
so much more than that.
But it's so much more than that. And so what I'm saying is that the knowledge that you bring, the perspective, like turning over the ball again, the knowledge that you bring about just the facts of history, the perspective that you bring being, again, checking the boxes like we talked about in the very beginning, being Latina, being military with that background, all of the pieces of background, even having worked as a chef or study cooking, all of that background helps you understand building a brand, which is a brand is a relationship, right? A brand is not a logo and a color. The brand is the relationship between the company, which says, I promise I'll do something, and the consumer that says, I believe you. It's that, that's all it is. The company.
It's a social contract.
That's what it is.
Just like government. That's probably how we got there.
I guess, but I'm just trying to bring it all together because I think it all is of a piece. Even though it feels to you a little bit like we went way over there and way over there, I don't think we really did actually. We just looked at the situations that we are talking about in just a little bit different way. And I'm trying to just, bring it all back together, which is that you are going to be working with these companies to help them communicate with the people that need what they have. I mean, you talked about the focus product at Tejas, for example, and whatever the products at K&D Infusions are. I'm pitching your guys, right? But whatever those things are, they're going to be making a contract, like you said, or a promise to the people that need what they have, and then they're going to deliver on that progress, that promise, over and over and over. And then more people will get the word, and more people will get the word. And then that will create a bigger and better company, create more jobs, create more opportunity. And then others will watch what you've done and they'll do it that way. And they'll understand the promise.
That's the goal. I think the goal is, and I'm not saying I'm perfect by no means. I have my mentors who put me in check. I have Nicole West on the line who tells me when I'm being an asshole, and I sometimes, can be a bull. And Chris, you too. You've given me great advice. But I think what we have an opportunity to do is be that reflective and create something new. I think you're absolutely on it. And the thing is, that's why I'm so excited about the partnerships with Tejas and the partnership with K&D in California, is that we are doing something that brings the product to the people in a way that is accessible, that is empowering. And I think when we have other organizations and companies within the industry that begin to center the conversation on their consumer, they're going to start to see a little shift, and each group can carve out its own little piece of the pie, which is infinite and abundant, because we don't even know what the limit of all the applications for cannabis medicine or entheogenic medicine can
Exactly
be.
Right. We're not even close.
We fight over something we have this is like fighting over how many stars are in the sky. Like, we can figure this out, guys. There's plenty of room for everyone.
Yes, and I think
there's room for everyone, but we need to make sure we are very proactive about While for everyone, unfortunately, the system is still designed in a way, as you described and what Rico probably talked about in his interview, the system is not designed for everyone though. So we need to evaluate what that looks like, show up to the polls, meet with our congressional leaders, and meet with them in a way where I understand sometimes as advocates, we feel really aggressive, we feel heated. In California, you know what? Y'all need to do what you need to do. What the cultivators are doing after, and what the retail stores are doing after being raided by the police and basically robbed under the threat of the
Absolutely.
law, which is insane.
Robbed at gunpoint. Robbed at gunpoint.
At some point, you need to let people know that they can't mess with you. As far as advocates in prohibition states that are still trying to just get access, that's when you need to start having educational conversations so that way you can influence policy and you don't end up in the situation that California is in. Although I do not blame any advocates or anyone in California, because you guys were some of the first. You were experimenting, you were learning, and you have your own collection of, clash of culture, regulation, and other systems. So
yeah, let's not forget, while we're bagging on California, let's not forget that California legalized cannabis for medicinal use 25 years ago, and that Texas will not even consider legalizing cannabis for recreational or adult use at all. So let's just put those brackets on it. But the other thing is, let's not forget that the reason that California was able to legalize medicinal use cannabis was because of AIDS patients who had AIDS, who had HIV, AIDS, and cancer that were related to those things. It was compassionate use. The whole program was called compassionate use. So let's not forget, California was 25 years ahead of anyone else in understanding the needs of patients and the way that the cannabis plants could meet the needs of those patients, especially in the most challenging, awful moments of their lives. That cannabis was the thing that could save them or that could bring them home in peace.
Absolutely.
That we understood.
Away from the history of California, it has its own unique challenges, and you guys have to do what you have to do. At this point, I think cultivators should be standing up. The moral of the story was that if you're in a prohibition state, however, it pays to win more bees with honey.
No doubt.
Yep. And it does, especially when you're talking to congressional members or trying to, and on that state level. So
Sure.
What we saw with the Feinstein expose that's been coming out is that on that higher echelon level, they're really not listening. They already have an agenda. These decisions have already been made. They're decided
Sure.
behind closed doors where money is exchanged, contracts are signed, just like any other business or enterprise. We need to consider that our government is running very much like a business, and
America Incorporated.
Exactly, which is not ideal, because that's not what we're supposed to be doing as a democracy. We don't want that. That's why we have all the antitrust laws and the rules that we have is supposed to reflect the will of the people, not the will of any individual profit or corporate profit. We'll figure that out. But all of that is to say that there's an opportunity for us to just do better, to look at it and self-reflect. And California is doing what it can do given the certain unique circumstances and situation it's in. But advocates in prohibition states would do a lot better to just actually have educational conversations instead of alienating or ostracizing or fighting. We need to actually sit down and talk with people. Even when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to race advocacy, we've seen progress in Austin, at least when we've sat down and had some really candid conversations. I know that's hard to gauge in a state like Texas because, you've got to remember, Texas was one of the last states to let people know that slavery was over. And that's why we have Juneteenth. So we have a pattern of slow behavior over here. It means that we need to do better on education. And that can be done in California too. I think a lot of the issues that you guys have run into is because they went full steam ahead way too fast without considering all the implications and without actually getting the opinions of all the parties in play. Because at the time, legacy market was not really considered. This was really more about making money.
And also the individual municipalities were allowed to opt out if they wanted to. And then the reefer madness type people, the enemies, the prohibitionists rose up into power in those little slots and almost 70% of the municipalities in California opted out and refused to have any cannabis business. So even though the California market is supposedly this big giant machine that's creating so much revenue, et cetera, 70% of the market is not involved. I mean, the numbers are staggering, really. It's quite amazing. So there's a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do and a lot of education to do. I so agree with you. I worry a little bit, like we talk about the news, in State of Cannabis News Hour. News is what happened yesterday. And when we focus on the news, I think we lose perspective on what we need to do going forward. I worry that we are all talking about, oh my God, that happened. Well, yeah, you can't change, it's like that old saying, you can't change the past. The future never arrives. The present is the gift, right? It's just like you were saying. So focusing on the news is focusing on things that happened in the past. And you and I hope, and I think you and I are both visioned this way, think about what's happening and what's coming forward and how to provide solutions, not problem solving, but provide solutions to the things that we see going forward,
Yes.
that we're proactive. And we try to get out there.
Opportunities, even just exploring opportunities. Like sometimes we pigeonhole ourselves when we think we found the solution. Like I noticed this a lot with red and blue, the Dems versus the Republicans in cannabis.
Sure.
Is that each one is like, I've got the solution, it's this, and they're ignoring that it's a complexity of issues, and it's going to take a very complex, like, not to sound like a Department of Defense talking head, but this is what we normally it's a complex issue. It's going to take a complex solution. It's going to take us looking at the different opportunities where we can grow instead of just chastising one another for the places where we fucked up. Acknowledge where we've messed up and figure out what you can learn from it so you can move forward, because we can't keep looking backwards with the hope of moving forward. We have to address what has happened and then create a plan to actually do something about it. That's
do better, right? And
Yeah.
do better. I'm so with you. I love the way you said that so many times. We simply need to do better, and we can. And we can. And we can. Look at you and me. We have so many ways that we do not connect, you and I. And yet we connect so profoundly over the issues that we see together, right? Starting with the plant is the thing that brings us together, really. But then you and I have connected in ways, and we've never even met, by the way. Let's just be clear. You and I have never even been in the same room together. But we have connected in so many ways with the plant as the centerpiece of it, right?
Absolutely.
In so many ways that other me's and other you's would never connect, right?
No, I mean, the plant, that's kind of what it does. So even when we look at, like, when I get really nerdy, and this is part of the love affair when I went to culinary school, was I got to really play with edibles and infusions on a level of a chef. So not being limited by manufacturing, although there is something really beautiful about finding the right dosage and formula for everybody. And that's something that I'm learning on this path. But what I really got to experience was how the plant, basically, even with food, like when you use the plant and you use a kind of food, like let's take citrus, it'll amplify the limonene that you have, or the results that you can get with the citrus, right? So cannabis, like, it does this on this actual physiological level. It can also do this on the spiritual, psychological level, and spiritual being not necessarily tied to religion, but tied to some kind of this energy that we know permeates our field of being, and we can feel it from one another. And so it can be a bridge between gaps when we're talking about disconnection, when we're talking about energetic flow, when we're talking about co-creation. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about it, is that it does this in a way where it's not only doing it psychologically or metaphysically, it's also physically doing it. It's amplifying the terpenes, it's amplifying other cannabinoids. Like, it's a bridge, it's a facilitator. If you take it with other vitamins, it amplifies how it carries and passes on those nutrients to your body. It's water, it's a messenger, a conduit for our nervous system. And it's something that we should maybe take a little more seriously.
You're amazing, Shaun. I so love to hear you talk about the plant. Honestly, it's just really breathtaking. I call it, I say that it's, God's favorite plant, and it sounds a little hokey, to sort of say it that way, but I really do believe, and the more that I hear you talk about it, I believe it even more firmly. It's as close to a miracle as we have in the world. I think the plant is, in terms of the way that it can touch us, the way that it can bring us together, the way that it can create economics, it can create health. It's just everything. It's just everything. So I'm with you on the path. I'm with you all the way.
Woo, it's all the plant. It's all the plant.
It's all the plant. All credit to the plant, no question about it. But the way that you speak about it is really remarkable and eye-opening, and it's so heartwarming. Honestly, Shaun, really, it's wonderful.
It's easy to fall in love when it's.
So, we fell in love with the plant.
Yes. I'm in love with cannabis and all sorts of plant medicines. I'm in love with the whole idea of total wellness. I think everyone deserves that. I think it's a basic human right. We have an endocannabinoid system. Don't you think it's a right to be able to balance that then?
Absolutely. It's built into our human biological entity. It is built in. Mm-hmm. Let's accept it.
It's a part of self-regulation. Like, it helps so many people with self-regulation. Maybe some people it doesn't work. That's fine. Not for you. That's cool. But if it does help you with your own regulatory systems in your body, then you should not be denied access to it because of some propaganda, racist propaganda against, Mexican people after the Mexican-American Wars and contentions with Latin America. And then also the Black community, jazz musicians, creativity, basically seeing the beginning of Black innovation and excellence, starting to, not the beginning of Black excellence because it was always there, the beginning of it starting to see the fruits of its seeds, like
starting manifesting itself.
Yes, and they needed to shut that down, so it was threatening.
Can't have that. Exactly. It's boy, is it depressing. No wonder critical race theory is being shut down so hard, because people don't want to be seeing that stuff. They don't want to be seeing those truths.
It's hard to deal with your own guilt when it comes to atrocities or issues that we've committed as Americans, but we have to really acknowledge that if we're going to move forward. And it's about, like I said earlier, when Kelly was talking about practicing that radical form of self-acceptance and shame resilience, where you can look at your own shit and kind of be like, okay, that was messed up. We need to fix it. Like,
we need to do better. Yeah,
we need to do better. Enough about our own sense of shame and guilt. Let's do better for the future, because at this point, our story is already happening. It's already being told. We're looking at global issues. We're looking at global security problems. We're looking at a globalized economy that is interdependent and interconnected. And we're looking at climate change. This is like a real thing that we need to get together on. And I think cannabis is a pathway for us to have deeper conversations about our personal lives and what we're doing as a collective. That's the goal, at least.
Wonderful. What I'd like to do, Shaun, I so appreciate your time. I know you've got a lot of things to do. You've got 2 big new contracts, plus South by Southwest coming up. You've got KND Infusions. You've got Tejas. Is it Tejas Ranch or
Tejas Hemp? Tejas Hemp.
Tejas Hemp. Okay, great. Yeah. And also you're highly informed, which is really going to kick off at South by Southwest, and hopefully it launches you into the stratosphere, and then I'll never be able to talk to you again, and I'll remember my old friend Shaun.
No. I mean, that's not what it's about. That's the beauty of highly informed, is that it's about capturing your stories. Like, it's about, I'm only interested in being a fly on the wall of the industry story, because we are making history. If we haven't realized gravity of this. So it's never about the ego. It's always about the story. It's about the community. It's about what we're sharing, the vibe that we're sharing with each other. And I am so excited. I'm hoping to have it launched by 4/20, of course, but we'll have to see, because we have a lot going on. I'm very excited about the partnership with K&D out in California. I cannot wait. We're looking at nano emulsifications and all sorts of good stuff. So I'm really getting my hands in the science on this one. And then at Tejas, we've got our good old THCV. We're going to help fix the world. We're going to cure some ills and smoke some good weed while we're at it. So I'm
you're going to, with Tejas, I hope you're going to help me do product reviews for you. I'm especially interested in the focus product, like we talked about.
Absolutely.
Hearing your guy talk about that last week, I was completely hooked. Just hearing him describe what it does and how well it works. So and because I know that it's a hemp derived product, I don't have to come to Texas to get it. You can actually ship some to me. So
that's the beauty. That's the beauty. That's what we're going to be working on, Chris. We're working on scaling Tejas and getting delivery options to the people. That's the goal. So
I get it. Well, listen, count on me to help you get the word out of it. All right. But listen, I know you've got a lot to do, even though it's a Friday. I know you've got plenty going on. So I just wanted to say thank you again. I wanted to say thank you again for being so generous with your time, so generous with your thoughts, so generous with your knowledge and your wisdom. Shaun, you're really quite a remarkable person. I think you're just terrific. So I'm really grateful to have you. Thank you so much. So I want to say thank you so much to Shaun Salvaje for spending so much time with me today. Shaun is the founder of Highly Informed and also is a consultant working with two great up-and-coming brands. One is Tejas Hemp in Texas, in Austin, Texas, sorry. And the other is KND Infusions, an upcoming edibles brand in California. So thank you so much for that. And I want to say special thanks, of course, to Pro Cannabis Media, the founder, Jimmy Young, and also Dan French, who has been so incredibly helpful and patient in helping us get through all this. Make sure that you share, like, and subscribe to everything you possibly can with regard to Pro Cannabis Media. And I'm Christopher Smith, publisher of the American Cannabis Report and showing up on Pro Cannabis TV.